Ghost, spirit, specter, spook, apparition, wraith, phantom. What you vision in your mind's eye at the utterance of any of these words is almost certain to be different than what I see when I hear them. But there is something secondary, something supplemental to the specter itself, which is likely to be the same. The element of darkness. And there may be something indelible to the ghost story, which involves the element of darkness that has evolved with the idea of the ghost itself. Join me as we journey back to the very first ghost story, one of the very first stories in general that we can still tell, in order to find what it is about the ghost that is hand in hand with darkness.
This video will appear in 4 separate playlists here on the channel. The first is the literary essay playlist, examining some of the biggest ideas in literature. The second is the darkest playlist, examining the darkest aspects in literature. The third is the horror playlist, which is pretty much how it sounds. And finally, the Horror Fest 2024 playlist, 31 horror-related videos in 31 days for October 2024. If you like or appreciate this type of work, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. And if you find yourself here by chance but not design, consider hitting the subscribe button to stick around for more literary content in the future.
In order to get a look at the oldest ghost story that we still have to travel all the way back to ancient Egypt, somewhere between the 19th and 20th dynasties, to be more specific. That puts us between 1292 BCE and 1077 BCE, so long ago that Robert Frost was not even cranky yet.
Both of these dynasties fall into what are known as the Ramessid period. The era begins with Ramses I and lasts through Ramses XI.
And because this story is so old, we do not have a complete copy of the story itself. So the beginning of the story is still a mystery. But the first named character in this narrative is someone named Khonsuemheb, the high priest of Amun. Different than Khonsuemheb, the drunk priest of Amun. Beer and pomegranate really do a number on a guy, don't you know?
Khonsuemheb receives a visitor, a man who, for some reason, was forced to spend the night in the necropolis for Thebes, and in the middle of that night, he's woken up by a ghost. So, Khonsuemheb takes to the rooftop of the temple in order to call on the ghost. When the spirit manifests, Khonsuemheb asks his name. He replies that he is Nebuchadnezzar, son of Akhmen and the lady of Tamshaz.
Different than Nebuchadnezzar, the son of Akhmen and the not quite so ladylike and hairy-knuckled floozy of Tamshaz. Still an important guy, though.
Nebuchadnezzar, in life, held a position of leadership in the army and oversaw the treasury. See, pretty important. And he has returned as a wraith because his tomb was destroyed, and the wind is disturbing him. Khonsuemheb understands the predicament and says he will give the ghost a new tomb complete with a shrubbery. Nee!
But, of course, Nebuchadnezzar simply does not believe him. He's heard it all before. You high priests, you're all the same.
But Khonsuemheb insists he will send offerings every day from servants, male servants and female servants. Everyone knows that ghosts of former treasury secretaries love offerings from female servants. But Nebuchadnezzar says that's awfully nice, but ultimately useless.
And here, the sands of time betray us, because there is another portion of this story which is missing, gone possibly forever. But we are left to assume that in that intervening text, the portion of the story we do not have, the two decide to go to King Smutton Common, a very popular strip club of the day, in order to talk business. And business must have been talked because when the text resumes, Khonsuemheb has sent out a party to scout locations for a very new, very shiny, very secure tomb.
And they find a place about 40 feet away from King Mentuhotep II, known today, perhaps ironically or perhaps symbolically, as the king who reunited Egypt, the way that Nebuchadnezzar's burial place was restored by the priest who laid him back to rest.
According to translations of the text, the last quote that we have directly from the story is, "And in the evening he returned to sleep in the Nay, and he... the Nay being the necropolis." We are left to assume a happy ending. Of course, this is simply an assumption. Still, there are three things obviated by the text that we do have if we're willing to dig a little bit deeper.
The first is this. When our wayward traveler, who I think is a grave robber making up a story, comes to Khonsuemheb with the news of a ghost, Khonsuemheb knows exactly what to do and how to conjure the spirit. There is a system in place. There is an order of operations, and he executes it immediately. Of course, this suggests that though this is the earliest ghost story to which we have account, it is obviously not the first ghost story, the first ghost encounter that there ever was. It is then too interesting not to ask the questions, what stories existed before this? Did they share some of these same details? Did those ghost stories share some of these same elements? And will we ever find them? The second interesting tidbit from this story 3,000 years ago is that it was already instilled in the collective unconscious that disturbing the dead would lead to the return and unrest of the tomb's inhabitant, meaning that neither did this idea originate with the Khonsuemheb story. How ancient is this idea? Is it as old as ritualistic burials themselves? That practice goes back at least as far as the Neanderthals, and perhaps as far back as Homo naledi. And why use a ritualistic burial if not to protect something or promote something? Meaning, the idea of ghosts may have been with us longer than our ability to talk and tell ghost stories. And the final element I want to talk about here, and the questions it raises perhaps about the very intrinsic nature of ghosts, is the element of darkness. The first and most obvious connection between the ghost and the darkness is that the ghost appears to our potential grave robber, potential night guard, in the middle of the night while he's sleeping. This connection may seem obvious to us today, as steeped in thousands of years of horror and folklore as we are, but why should this instinctively be the case? But here is the second and perhaps most telling connection between spirits and the darkness. Our patron of questionable intent, where does he go? To Khonsuemheb, of course, whose name means Khonsu in jubilation. Jubilation, of course, is not a term of darkness. But who is Khonsu? And why should our kindly be haunted seek his priest? Khonsu means traveler, itself not particularly telling, but the word itself becomes a name in reference to his celestial wanderings. In specific, the way the moon ambles across the sky. So, yes, Khonsu was a god of light, but the god of light in the darkness, the Egyptian god of the moon. Khonsu was also known to drive away evil spirits, so the assumption embedded in that very designation is that during the night, while the moon is in the sky, people would need Khonsu, the moon god, to protect them against evil spirits.
So, here we are, a millennia later, listening to a ghost story. A ghost story which is stunningly similar to the ghost stories that we still tell. Is this a coincidence? Is it simply effective storytelling? Or are these elements so consistent through the annals of time because these are the realities of the things which go bump in the night?